That's what adaptability is. Cool. So there's a really cool video that I cut together last night that I hope I'll show you here at the end, and we'll deal with it. So welcome, prototyping immersive experiences, rapid prototyping. The talk has many different names. I'm Preston McCauley. And this is the world I live in. I really love this quote overall. In fact, you've seen it pop up everywhere. Any Star Trek watchers right now? Yeah, the new one, right? Actually, big call out to Alice in Wonderland, which I thought was awesome. So I really love that world. I love being immersed in it and thinking about that. My friend Ron here is in the audience. He'll be speaking next as well. And so, looking at that quote, it's kind of what I feel like I'm doing. It's a little bit like the Mad Hatter syndrome. You have to go a little bit crazy to be in this space right now because it's so challenging, the things that you run into, the technological glitches. It's like they happen every single moment. I'm experiencing one right now, but we can't get frustrated. We have to go through the crazy. So it really is an amazing time to be a creator. I think that's what I try to tell people when I'm out talking with them. Is like, you have to push past that and think about what could you potentially build. When I was first, I was one of those people that was in VR back in the day, like several of you probably were here, when we hopped into our lovely polygonal world, and it was awesome, and like Lawnmower Man. Anybody remember Lawnmower Man, right? Yeah, I still watch that movie and still go, that's still pretty cool. But when I saw that, and when I picked up the HTC Vive, I was sitting there and I was jumped into Universe Sandbox. Does anyone use Universe Sandbox? Great app. I sat there and I looked up in the sky, aka virtual sky, and I sat down on the ground and I was like, wow, we're finally here. Like, I can feel this. I'm emotionally drawn into this. I'm connected to this in ways that I had never thought I could be connected to this type of space. I didn't think we'd make it here quite so soon. So that's really exciting for me because now it just opens up Pandora's box. And not in a bad way, but in a way of like, there's so much to learn, there's so many things. How do I catch up? How do I, spend all that time? In this room, I think we shared like 3 resources right before we started. That's like, everyone's like, I didn't know about that, I didn't know about that, and I didn't know about that, right? So that's the type of space we're in here. And one of the things that I work with is a lot of prototyping. I love looking at building out very difficult, very hard to understand ideas. And our vehicles for prototyping right now are like this. Now, I come from the 2-dimensional UX world, design, etc. And so when I look at this, it's just another problem to solve. We need to build tools that allow people to prototype. And when I say people, I mean everyday people, because that's how we need to get to the adoption level in these types of experiences. And we need to build a whole bunch of ideas that really move beyond kind of the physical realm. You were talking about this a lot earlier, and it's super exciting to me because we start to cross into the metaphysical side of things, the philosophy, the physics, the astronomy, the kinesiology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And traditional mediums are not set up in that way. Think of print design, right? Do we have any print designers here? See? I love that. Yeah, right? Your work with a space, it's a fixed space, and then, of course, we all got the moniker above the fold, right? Which translated to our web space, and all of us UX designers and web designers of the time were like, stop saying that. The fold is different sizes because your screen can change. So, we follow these different types of things, and we really want to try and push things beyond the boundaries that exist. So I look at ideas, and I say, what can cross digital and human boundaries? How can we find ways to connect people to these new worlds of virtual constructs around us? And how can we help them get into that idea space so that they feel like they get it? Because no one wants to jump onto a platform or an experience that they don't understand. It disconnects them, which is a key component of immersion, is you want to be immersed in it. You want to feel like, I get it, I understand it, I can make it my own. And we're still not there yet. We've still got a ways to go. Ideas the world can understand, except when it gets cut off. But we're trying to come up with these different things, these different systems, these applications. And for me, the passion really is all about application design. It's not about game design. But I will caveat that by saying that I love to play games. I play so many games, it's ridiculous. Any other gamers here? Yeah. I always like to check that out in the audience because it's kind of funny. Because for me, it's like trying to take our existing world and gamify it, which we went through in the UX space heavily. Every single conference I went to was add game mechanics to your game or to your existing application. Make your boring tasks exciting, right? Well, a boring task is still a boring task. People want to complete things. They want to get in. We have this kind of egocentric view that like our apps are the best and the most important experience you're ever going to experience. You should be in there forever. I don't necessarily think that's true. But when we do this type of design, we want to bring everybody into the mix. And that's kind of where I am, is I'm out there educating people on this topic. I've been in the UX space for about 20 years and co-founder and teacher of the UX program at SMU Cape, and I'm continuing to evolve that. Also co-organizer with my buddy Ron there of the Immersive Design Group and Development Group in Dallas. I don't know what to call myself. It's a very long title right now, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. I understand the design and the experiential, but I also have the added benefit of knowing how to build it. So Ron, you were first to experience that, I think, when I had an idea and a dream, and I woke up in the next morning and we built it out. I wanted to throw fireballs in the HoloLens. Let's go do it, right? And then we had it. And then we okay, well, Ron wants to share it in that experience. So we created a virtual Azure server where we could actually share the spatial data. And then I was throwing fireballs at Ron. So it's that type of, yeah, not right now, but it's that type of thing that when you leave the dream realm and you wake up and you're like, oh, I just built that thing that I just dreamed, that is so empowering and so exciting. That's what brings me back to this. So why spend time on prototyping? Why even take the time to do it, right? So a lot of companies, as many of you will know, because you're at the conference here, we're kind of in a bubble right now in Houston here. They're kind of experimenting with VR. Certainly in Dallas, where I'm from, they're trying to, get their hands on it. They don't know quite how to use it yet. They don't know what cool things. Throughout the different people I've spoken with, a lot of them have said, our marketing department used to have money in the innovation budget to work on VR. But now that's actually shifted to our marketing management team. And now they're like, I have a $2 million budget to spend on VR. I have no idea what I'm going to build, nor do I know how to actually get an ROI on that. So, there's going to be time. It's going to take a lot of time to retool if you don't have these. And I mentioned this before, but understanding that the real world does not mimic the game world. I'm finding a lot of people, and rightly so, because it's the closest analogy we have, of people taking the game design world and applying it to our augmented world, to our mixed reality world, and you're seeing a lot of those mechanics come up. I just want us to be mindful of that. And the way we do that is we work on prototyping these concepts out to figure out, do they actually make sense? Are they functional? Are they important? I think the biggest challenge I've run into is it's been very hard to have these conversations. We're talking multi-dimensional spatial conversations where you're talking about living inside of a virtual construct or multiple constructs where space and time don't necessarily matter. Think about that. It's kind of like a casino, right? Because you're in a casino and they take all the clocks away from you and you're like, how long have I been here, right? You don't know. So I think that those types of things are really a challenge for everybody because we don't have that level of communication evolved yet. Has anyone seen Arrival? Yeah, great movie. I won't spoil it for anybody, but I just saw it. And I was like, oh, wow, this is right up my alley. This is just like my talk. This is perfect. So go watch it. And it's really good, and it'll make more sense with that. So a lot of times, too, we'll find out that the experience design objectives, the business objectives, the company objectives are going to be different from what your own personal objectives are. So by prototyping, you can do it cheap, quick. and kind of run through that process before you spend all the dollars in Unity, building out a perfect 3D model, doing all of these different aspects, which are going to take a lot of time. And also, I think I mentioned this before, is the field is moving to mainstream. There's knowledge of it. Certainly in my area, there's knowledge of it. But it's just knowledge of the words, not of the possibilities. And so that's how I look at it. There's no understanding of the possibilities of what can be happened. I'm not going to cover this a lot, except for the fact that this is my hardware ecosystem that I work in. I'm polytechnically savvy. I don't lock myself down to one technology because we're in a platform evolution. We haven't decided yet what's going to happen. Is it going to be a meta device? I think definitely we're going to borrow from the best of these as we start to go forward, right? Meta, HoloLens, mixed reality, virtual reality, the R's, it's pirate reality is how I look at it, because I'm always saying R all the time now. So the other thing is we can't leave behind the mediums necessarily that we're using today, because they're still a big part of our experiential existence. We still have phones. There's one thing that I talk a lot about, which is like device access capability, right? Being able to bring your phone into a virtual experience, still be able to interact in that space. It's very analogous to responsive web design, which became, the big moniker of the day for a lot of marketing agencies. Is we need to make sure we have responsive websites, right? So I think the next evolution is we need to make sure we have responsive virtual experiences. And how do we do that? So tons of input. Oh my gosh, there's so many input ecosystems. All of them have their problems and their challenges. For me, one of the biggest things is trying to understand, like, what are we building out with all of these different devices, and how do we approach it differently if we're using motion controllers or this Microsoft wand device, that like a baton, like this thing, but understands spatial recognition. And it requires us to really take a look at a lot of different areas. We have world design, game design, virtual design, transformational interfaces, spatial relations. Like I said, I'm going to blow through a lot of this, but I only have a short amount of time here. So key concepts. These are some of the things that I boiled down right away. I look first at the experience. I look at storytelling and scene setting. That's how I set up what I'm going to prototype. I don't think about the technology I'm going to use. I think about what is the end result of that. Okay? So sketching perspective possibilities, which is sketching perspectives, one-point perspectives, going back to the basics. I had to learn how to sketch again. Perspective sketching. 3D modeling, creation, limitations of the tools. I've learned many 3D tools, unfortunately. I don't like ZBrush, but there's lots of tools out there that you have to learn and at least have a familiarity with. Natural physics, supernatural interactions, I talk a lot about these. Kinematics, body motion, all of these different things are kind of what we have to be aware of when we're building an experience, or your team has to be aware of some aspects of these. I'm a one-man team, so I have to be aware of all of these. So when I started to look at this, I needed to have nomenclature to be able to have communications with some of the teams I've been working with. So I looked at it and said, 2 years ago at South by Southwest, I started making notes on all this stuff, and I was like, this is really vexing to me. So this is why, from that, I built the virtual experience. Because it applies to virtual reality, applies to AR, all of these different systems it applies to. And within those, you have virtual interaction points that allow you to work within. So any particular virtual experience could have multiple virtual interaction points. They could be complex, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, onward and onward types of interactions within there. There's also physical interaction points within there where we can cross over between this object here is in the physical world, but now it's in the virtual world. And what does that mean? What could I do with that? Social interaction is a whole other subset of that as well. So when I looked at the VEX overall, the virtual experience, I looked at understanding environments and settings and scenes and presence and engagement and anchoring ourselves to help with that world fixation, and modes of navigation, wayfinding, distraction, disillusionment, I call them the 4Ds. These are all the things that can pull you out of that experiential moment. Position, placement, I mentioned earlier, the device access, like how do we access the different mediums that we're working within virtual space? limitation, and then these extrasensory devices. How else can we experience it, whether it be haptic devices, force feedback, lasers beaming at your eyes to show heat, whatever it might be. You never know. So think scenes, not screens. That's what I tell my students. Like, think about the scene that you're trying to build. Think communication, not art. Because if we start focusing on art immediately, and I work with a team that we specifically called it, I had to come up with a new name for it. It's called the Immersive Art and Experience Team. Because we want to make sure that art is a big component of this, because we're defining the next level of interaction design patterns. And they should be beautiful. They should be amazing. We don't want hamburger menus of the now. Everybody's seen a hamburger menu. Yes, you know what I'm talking about, right? So, cool. Arrows are the hamburger menu of the AR space right now. Oh, there's an arrow on the ground. Follow that arrow. We fall into these patterns really quick. So, these are some of the methods I use. So analog, active discussion, starting out to understand high-level workflows, overviews, experience maps, paper sketches, mood boards, physical props, dioramas. Live actors can just sit in a room and interact in the space to kind of figure out what you're going to do there. Blocks and shapes. I've even used paper origami at times to do this, especially multidimensional, because I can fold it in and out. So for HoloLens, for example, I created plastic sheets because they actually reflect the light in the same way, almost prism-like, like a hologram. So if you draw on them with a marker, you'll actually get very close representation of what that holographically would look like. So you can hang them in a room and see those menus in space around you. So the other thing is, and what I found is, you need to use a variety of these methods together. Oops, sorry about that. To figure out what you're ultimately trying to build. So blended, I've used 2D renders, and those 2D renders will go to 3D renders and vice versa. Holographic overlays, which I mentioned earlier, kind of mixing some of these to try and find new ways to prototype very quick. My goal is quick, fail fast. I'm very agile in that approach. Digital, Verto Studio. Has anyone used Verto Studio? It's my #1 tool. I can build up and I can actually retexture an entire environment in the HoloLens like in a matter of moments. So like I could take this world around me and build it into a new virtual construct and prototype it. It's a great tool. And it exists in VR as well now. So you could also try it on Vive, some of those systems. Photoshop, Sketch, Unity, Unreal, of course. Sketchfab is great. With the AR implementation now, you can actually take any model, put it in the room in front of you, like instantaneously. Awesome.
Which one?
Sketchfab?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just with the iPhone, you can do that. Can't do it with the Android yet, I don't believe. A-Frame, React VR, Maya, Blender, all of these different tools I'm using. But when I started to think about that, the problem is I'm not really trying to prototype. I really want to solve problems, right? And so I don't think this is going to play, but URI Caston, has anyone seen this talk? It's great, and I think you should go watch it. It basically says, whenever I'm standing up here and I'm giving ideas to you all, you're forming the same exact mental imprint in your brain to basically be able to understand my idea. We have the same exact brain patterns right now, at least if you're listening to me. So that's pretty cool to think about that. So when I thought about that a little bit more, I was like, could I build a framework that helps people prototype? And that's kind of where I started. This is a work in progress. I don't even have a name for it yet. But I wanted to show something new because I like showing new things. So what's the problem to solve? And this is not about prototyping, but it's helping you to think about how you should begin to prototype. Because what's the frame of reference? Not for you, but for the person you're trying to present to. Do they have an understanding of 3D space? Do they have an understanding of two-dimensional space? If you don't have that same frame of reference, you're going to go around in circles for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And trust me, I've done it. And so I was like, how do we get around that? How do we not have that problem? And then you can decide what the method of approach is. Should I use one of those two-dimensional methods? Should I use a blended method? Do I jump into Tilt Brush? Do I jump into Google Blocks? How do I go about figuring out that is this framework here? Also taking into consideration, what's the expertise of people? Like, the person that I'm going to communicate with, what is their base understanding of this space? Do they understand that they can do more than just a hamburger menu? I think earlier one of the questions, and I mentioned this, was when we have text, we tend to bring text into our VR world. Those that know, and by the way, I am extremely susceptible to motion sickness in VR. I do vomit fiercely. So I do put myself in harm's way to experiment with this stuff. But the thing is text reading is horrible in VR. It really is. So we got to find new ways to evolve those patterns. And that's kind of one of the constraints. Text in VR just doesn't work really well. Certainly mountains of text, right? With the control panel that was actually talked about earlier, my brain was like, okay, we do a progressive reveal, which is a UX pattern, where we show one piece of information in sequential moment so that we can show what the whole dashboard looks like. And then we overlay that information in different ways. There's ways we can evolve that, where you don't necessarily have to put all that in front of us. And what technologies are you going to use? Are you going to use Meta, AR, HoloLens? They all have their own constraints. They all have their own unique capabilities. HoloLens is great at doing deep spatial stuff. Meta is good at doing low-level SLAM. Phone, low-level SLAM, some spatial point stuff. It's not a lot you're going to get there, but. And we have a lot of challenge with the terminology, the shifting, the hardware. All of this is going to be really challenging across the board. Consumer entry is going to be costly. ROI is still in its infancy. I'm working with a company called Practical VR. We do have an analytics system in there that allows us to actually measure mixed reality engagements. So inside of VR, inside of that platform, the mixed reality headsets with Microsoft. So we're also working to define what is engagement in this medium. Looking at it that way is a different way to approach it as opposed to clicks and et cetera, et cetera. So trying to define what those new ways of engagement are. You know, the prototyping methods are still very archaic. You shared a really good one with me a moment ago on, you know, what was it? You mentioned the third, I can't remember the name of the company, but trying to find new tools that help us prototype. And I've been speaking with a lot of people to say, let me help you evolve these because I know where the problems are because I'm running into them every single day now. It's taken forever. Here's a whole bunch of resources. I read a lot. My morning is just nothing but reading and digesting. I actually write a lot on my own website, which is called uxmodes.com, where I share all of my insight into these various things, and I break them down, and you know, a lot more information than you can get in the short amount of time we have here. One of the best things is I think you should learn how to do some coding because it's going to help you build out the interactions that you need to be able to do to get deeper into your prototypes. A-frame is great. Ron's going to talk about that here in a moment. And I really like this quote from Pablo Picasso. I believe it's from, I'm pretty sure it is. I'm just going to say it is. Yeah. Everything you can imagine is real. Well, I've been able to do that firsthand now. And so it's like I sit there and I'm like, there's a 2D drawing. And I look, and then the next day, it's there in front of me, and it's now a hologram, or it's something that I can interact with and find new ways to create systems around it, or build it out to build upon existing design systems that have been around for a long time, and figure out, like, we had the fire alarm go off, right? How many of you knew to come back in and what time to come back in? Right? These are all problems we can solve. Like, if I just had my phone up here and you know, we all synced into a virtual cloud. It's like, oh, come back in, the fire's done, right? Or the fire marshal's virtual. You name it. But ultimately, the reason I spend a lot of time on prototyping is because I want to make those ideas as concrete as possible because ideas are really cheap. And the easier, the more solidity we add to those ideas, it makes it more real for everybody else. So it helps us evolve it much quicker. It helps us get to a new form of understanding that does border on the bounds of metaphysical. I'm working on a new design thinking deck, specifically working on supernatural and physical interactions. It's meant to help people think about spatial relationships and in the form of UX. I'm also very heavily invested in working on multidimensional state interactions where you're existing inside of multiple dimensional constructs at the same time. I have a theory about that being potentially connected to multiverses, but that's for another time. So here are all of the various means to connect to me. I'm on Steam in VR all the time, even despite my disability. online, and I have a lot of examples on the little Google YouTube page that I share. So I know we're kind of long, but a few questions? Then we'll get Ron up here. Yeah?
So you were talking about engagement.